Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, we are in snapshot 25W31A, which introduces a couple of new interesting features, the copper golem and shelves. Both of these new features are designed to help with inventory management, so what I want to look at in this video is whether we can use them to help make building in Minecraft more efficient. When you're working on a large project, you can end up using more blocks than you have spaces available in the hotbar, or even more spaces than you have available in your inventory. For example, if we take a look at this project, there are at least 20 different types of blocks that were used, which means that when you're working on the project, you spend a lot of time moving blocks back and forth between your inventory and the hotbar, or between shulker boxes or chests and your inventory. So what I want to do today is try and figure out whether we can use some combination of shelves and copper golems to make that process a lot easier. Let's get started, and we're going to start with the basics. To craft a copper golem, all you need is a copper block and a carved pumpkin. And that's going to give you not only the copper golem, but also a copper chest. And that's simple enough. And then to have the copper golem be able to sort items, you need to have a chest with items in it. So we've got cobbled deep slate bricks, and polished deep slate in this chest. And then if we put these stacks of blocks here, the copper golem will sort those blocks over into this chest right here. And the copper golem is going to do that in increments of 16 for blocks that can stack up to 64. So having a copper golem will result in having a pretty simple item sorter. Now let's take a look at how the shelves work. Shelves allow for some interesting storage options. If you go up to a shelf, you can place a whole stack of items into each of the slots, and there are 3 slots for each shelf. If you have an open slot on your hotbar, then when you go to select the items, it will fill that open slot. But if you have an item selected in your hotbar, then when you go to click on that shelf, it replaces the item in the hotbar. But where things get really interesting is when you start powering the shelves with redstone. If you power a shelf, then when you go to select it, it's going to pull the 3 items on the right side of your hotbar out. And that will allow you to quickly swap between 3 items at a time. But if you power more shelves next to each other, you can end up with being able to swap out the entire hotbar with items that are on that shelf. So we've covered the basics, but now let's take a look at how we can use these together to make building easier, or see if that's even possible. So my idea is that I want to be able to use this concept of being able to swap between hotbars to use that to easily switch building blocks around without having to open up the inventory or open up a bunch of chests. So I've set up these shelves to match what I've got in my hotbar other than the building blocks in the middle. And that way, when we click on these shelves, we're only swapping out those blocks, but the rockets, food, bed, and tools remain the same. With this simple setup, we've essentially expanded the blocks available in our hotbar from 3 to 6 without sacrificing any of the tools or other items that we would want to have, like food and rockets, which is pretty useful. But if you were to use this system on a major building project, you would end up with a lot of overlap between all of the extra items you would need to be able to put in for the rockets and food, or for all of the different tools you would need to have, which would then make this whole system very impractical. One way to expand the number of blocks that could be used in any one system would be to change up the way that we have our hotbars. So if we put the food in our offhand, we just stick with the rockets, we have the bed next to our shelves, and we cut down our tools to just a pickaxe and an axe, we can then go from switching between 3 blocks to 6 blocks, which means we've now increased our options from 6 to 12. So I've now expanded our block selection from 12 blocks to 24 blocks. I've also moved the items around in my hotbar so that my tools and rockets are all the way on the left, and that way we can use fewer shelves and tools, but still be able to increase the number of blocks that we're swapping. And you could imagine that if we were building, and let's say we wanted to use these wood types here, we could just go up, grab them all, and we would now have those 6 blocks. We'd go over here, put them back. We could then swap out to these ones, or we could swap those out. And this actually makes it really easy to be able to swap between a lot of different types of blocks. I'm starting to get pretty excited about this. But right now, there's a pretty significant limitation to this setup. And that's because these shelves only hold 1 stack of blocks for each section. And if you're building something really massive, that's going to make a system like this fairly useless. But we have hoppers, and they might be able to save the day. So in this hopper, I've got a stack of the pale oak log, pale oak planks, and cherry logs, and we've got those down here. And if we switch these out, what's going to happen? Are those going to start? Yes. So they're starting to load up the items from the hopper, and they're going into the items in the shelf. This could be useful. Okay, so we've just got the last few items loading up, and now if we swap these out, we end up with a full stack of blocks for each of them. Kind of hard to see because we're swapping between exactly the same type of blocks. But here's the challenge. Because if we have empty items here and we're not filling up these slots, guess what happens when we pull them out? The hopper loads items into those shelves, and then when we go to put these items back, we've now swapped them out and we've got extra items in our inventory that shouldn't be there. So what we need to be able to do is have a system that can tell when there are items on the shelf that need to be replenished, but won't put any items on the shelf when the shelf is empty. Let's see what we can come up with. The first thing that we need to be able to figure out is whether or not we can detect when there are items in the shelf. So we've got a comparator behind it. We've got these redstone lines right here, and then the redstone lamps to be able to tell what the signal strength is. So if we put items in, we are able to detect it. And you'll also notice that the signal strength is different depending on where the blocks are in the shelf. So if we have fewer items in the shelf, that's going to change what the signal strength is. Interesting. So with items in all three shelves, we have a signal strength of 7. It doesn't look like it changes whether or not you have a full stack or just one block. I think that's useful. So you can now see with this simple setup that as we add items to the shelves, as soon as there are 3 items in the shelf, it's going to turn off that redstone torch at the end. And it's going to be able to allow us to do that for each of these shelves right next to each other. And if we have the shelves powered, it is the same effect as well. So far, so good. I've realized for our system, we are using just 2 shelves. So I've narrowed it down over here. And I think what we're also going to do is compact down this little measurement back here. And I think I have an idea for how we can make this work in a much smaller space. So we now have a much more compact system that does exactly the same thing. So if we put 3 items into the shelf, you'll see the redstone torch turns off. But if we take out one of those items, then it comes back on. And the way that we're able to do this is because we are using these crafters here to send a signal strength of 7 into this comparator. And so in order for this comparator to send a signal all the way through, it has to receive a signal strength of 7, which it does once we have 3 items in the shelf. The other thing that this system will allow us to do is that we can stack it up next to each other and it will still function. So you can see here, if we put 3 items into this shelf, then that redstone torch turns off as well. I think we're making some good progress here. Now we need to figure out the system for replenishing the stacks of items that we're loading into the shelves. Could it be this easy? Just having the hoppers running into here and then we'd have separate chests for each of the shelves? Let's test it out. So in the chest, I have a full stack of cherry logs, pale oak logs, and mangrove logs, and we've got half a stack in our inventory. If we come over here and we put in these half stacks into this shelf, triggers the system, items are coming out of the chest. It's very slow. It's only one at a time, but we should start to see it filling up these items down here. So we've got a half a stack here. So in theory, we should get a full stack of all of these, and we do. They were refilled, but now we have the problem, which I was pointing out, and that is that once we start taking items out of here, then all of the items that are in this hopper are going to start filling up the shelf again. So here's the problem. Let's say we came back and we had a few items still left over. We go to put them back on the shelf, and now we have a half a stack that's been swapped out. And instead of having an empty inventory to be able to go and select some more items, we now have to deal with these items. This is starting to get complicated. One option would be to put hoppers underneath it, and then we could just flush the system if we had a bunch of blocks that we didn't want, and they would end up coming out. We could run the hoppers from back here out to here, put a chest in this area. That's definitely one idea, and I've added it in just to see how that looks. I think that could work, but I think in taking a look at this, the more important system to figure out is the one up here and not the one down here, because right now what we need to be able to do is to have exactly 1 stack of each of the items that are going to end up on the shelf to be in this chest to be able to control how much is going through here. Because if we had a bunch of items in this chest, what would end up happening is we'd get duplicates at some point here, which would create a whole new set of problems, and we don't want to make this more complicated. We want this to make building less complicated. So it's been a little bit of time, and I've done a lot of testing to try to figure out how we can get just one stack of each item to be able to end up in the system. And my first thought was to use hopper minecarts, because that way we could have a lot more control over the amount of items that would be going into the system. But you can see here, if we place down this hopper minecart, when it goes and is released, instead of just having one stack, we have one stack and a little bit. And no matter what I did, I could not get rid of those extra blocks to just have one stack. And we don't want a bunch of extra blocks. We need to keep it as close to one stack as possible. So after doing a little bit of exploring, I was able to find this pulse extender, and this gives us even more control. So what we have in these hoppers is half a stack of blocks. And if we trigger the pulse extender, what's going to happen is that the blocks in this chest will go down, and eventually we are going to end up with 63 items in this hopper. I did try to extend this by putting in one extra block in the hopper, but what that does is that ends up giving us one stack and one block, which again, we need to keep it under one stack. So 63 is going to be our final amount. Would I prefer to have exactly 64? Yes. Yes, I would. But have I been able to find a way to get exactly 64? No. No, I've not. The next part of the puzzle is to figure out how to incorporate this pulse extender into the system over here. And I've been giving it a lot of thought, like multiple hours of thinking. And the solution that I've come up with will require a complete redesign of the system that we have here. So we'll just copy that system over here, and now I can start changing it. So the first thing that I've done is I've switched around the system that's going to flush out extra items that are in the shelves by putting the levers over here. And those levers are connected up to these redstone torches, which are locking these hoppers currently. But if we flip the switch, it'll release the items. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this button and we're going to use this button to trigger when we want items to reload our shelves. So I've now connected the button into the pulse extender, and with the way that this is designed, we can put two of these together right next to each other, and they shouldn't interact with one another, which is going to be important later when we put this all together. So I've got a very preliminary setup here, and I just want to test it out to see whether or not it's going to work. So let's put 3 different stacks of items in here. We're going to go down and activate the system, and let's see whether or not we can get all of the stacks of items to end up in the shelves. But it's going to take a little while for the pulse extender to run, so give me a second. All right, let's see. Ooh, that's a bad sign there. Yeah, I was a little bit afraid of that. Okay. So because these are all grouped together, the blocks are getting stuck in this hopper. So we should, if we go down here, find out that we don't have a full stack. Well, we did get all of the target blocks, so that's a good sign. But not all of the deep slate bricks. Now I gotta figure out what to do, because this is our challenging spot. We need to make sure that we don't have any hoppers on this side, because we're going to have a different system over here, and we can't go too far over in this direction because we're going to have to mirror what we do on this side over on this side. This project is really making my brain hurt. This would be a cleaner design with the 2, but we need to find a place for the 3rd chest. We did something like this, that could potentially work. It does make this chest a little bit hard to access, which may be a problem, especially if we want to use the copper golems. All right, let's do a little bit of a test here. We've got a deep slate brick in here. If we put the deep slate bricks in here, will this copper golem be able to get down to that chest? All right, he's checking that one, and no. Why are you putting them in there? That doesn't make any sense. That's not the one to put them in. Okay, I'm trying this again, but I've put target blocks into this chest, so maybe that will help. This could be a problem. Okay, maybe not. All right. Well, this is why we do a test, to figure out why it's not working, and we figured out why this won't work, because this copper golem can't get down to this chest here. So I guess that was a success. So I've got a slightly different setup here. Let's see how this is going to work. So we're going to put some deep slate bricks in here. Let's put a stack in here. And will the copper golem find the correct location to put the deep slate bricks? So far, so good. Oh no, the pathfinding is broken. Where are you going? How? What? I mean, I suppose this is the correct location, but that's so far away. All right, let's try test number 2 here. So we've got deep slate bricks here. We've got target blocks here. We've got redstone blocks here. Let's see what happens when we put these in here. Will the copper golem find the correct location based on this little setup that we have? So we've replaced the carpets with slabs, so that should help with the pathfinding. He's looking for the redstone blocks and went here first. There's no redstone blocks in there. Will he find the redstone blocks which are down here? So I think there may be an issue because these chests are below the copper chest. So I've moved everything down to this level. Let's give it one more try and see whether or not we can get the copper golem to go to the correct place. Searching through, collecting up blocks, looking in this chest. This is a good sign. No, what? Why are you putting them in there? Okay, so now it's putting them in the correct spot, but why over here? I'm so confused. Are we going to put the target blocks in there? No. We're going to put target blocks in here. I am so confused and frustrated. So I think we've finally been able to get the copper golem to find the correct spot. It does seem to get a little bit confused by having to go into this chest. So it searches this one, searches this one, searches this one, goes up here, sits here for a few seconds, and then thinks about this chest. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but at least because we're going to get it into this chest eventually, I think we should be okay to get started with putting this all together. But let's run a quick test just to make sure that everything else works with the hoppers and getting the items to the shelves, and then we'll be able to get this decorated up. Let's let the system clear out and see how many blocks we've got at the end. Okay, 63 bricks, good. 63 targets, good. 62 redstone blocks. All right, could be worse. I think we're ready to put this all together. So I've now duplicated out the system here, and I've loaded it up with a bunch of different types of blocks, so that way we can see how this is going to work. Now, around to the back, we've also done a little bit of work. So we've got a bunch of copper golems back here, and they're going to be doing a lot of work to make sure that this will stay completely stocked. Down here, I went ahead and put some copper chests, and this is where all of the items that we flush out of the system, they're going to end up down here, and then the copper golems can come down, pick these up, and return them to the chest, which will be up here. So I think this should be all ready for a test. And while those items are being loaded up, we can be headed off to go build something. And just for the sake of the test here, we're going to put the items in this chest, but we'll say I've used those items. And actually what we could do is, let's say we have just a couple of items left over. So we've got a few stairs. We've got a few stairs over here, maybe some of the polished blocks, polished andesite blocks. And let's say that's our inventory after we've been out building, and we're now back ready for more items. It doesn't look like there are any more being loaded in. So if we select this, it should give us about 62 or 63. And we've got 61, 62. Okay, so pretty close to a full stack of items. But you can see in the shelves, we've got the extra items that we had left over. So we can just flush those out, and those will end up in the copper chest, and then they'll be picked up, or maybe not. What's going on here? It's a little bit strange why all of those items didn't get cleared out. Maybe that's a bug. Probably should have tested that a little bit more. Let's do one more test. Okay, so we've loaded up a new set of blocks here, and if we go ahead and swap them out, let's go ahead and flush the system, and will it actually work? No. I mean, the redstone torches are unlocking it. I don't really understand why. There we go. Okay. Does it need to be? It's so strange. All right. It may be because this is a snapshot. There are some bugs that still need to be worked out. So hopefully that will be fixed once it gets to the full release. But now let's see whether or not our copper golems are actually going to function correctly. The copper chests that we want them to look at are down there. So let's see. So far, they seem focused on these chests back here. I've now updated this system, and instead of having the copper chest down at the bottom, because the copper golems couldn't make their way down, I've gone ahead and installed a water elevator, which will take all of the items that we discard and put them back into the system. And then we've got the copper golems up here who are going to be able to look in these chests and then sort them into these chests. Now, one thing that you may notice is that I've actually had to expand this by 1 block because this system, which should have been able to operate together, was creating all sorts of issues. So I had to put a block of separation in between each of these little modules. But I think this system is now completed, which is a huge relief because I've been spending so much time trying to figure out how this redstone is supposed to work. But I think in the end, we've come up with a pretty good system that shouldn't have any issues. We've got copper golems, which shouldn't have any issues either. They're going to be focused on their own little module. They won't be trying to go off over into other copper golems modules to try to sort items. So this is going to be a lot better overall. And this system will be pretty useful because you can select 6 items, you can put them back, you can get 6 different items, put those back, go off and build with these items, put them back, take these, good to go, and it will automatically refill the items, which should make for some much faster building. But as useful as this system might be, it would probably be for something that's a little bit more long-term and a big project. You wouldn't want to build this for a small project because you'd probably spend more time getting it built than you would actually spend building it. But I could see this being pretty useful if you were doing something like building a city where you were using a lot of common types of blocks that were going to be used across multiple projects. I've had a lot of fun building it. I've learned a lot about redstone, and I think that is where we are going to leave it for today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And until next time, see you later.